Good evening and welcome to the Binge Eating 101 webinar. We're so glad you could join us. I'm Marcia Hudnall, the president and co-owner of Green Mountain at Fox Run. Green Mountain is a women's healthy weight center in Vermont that pioneered the non-diet approach to healthy weight management more than 40 years ago. Since then, we've been working with women who binge eat because the behavior is commonly seen in women who struggle with weight. We've recently increased our focus on binge eating by bringing on board Carrie Anderson, Doctor of Behavioral Health and licensed professional counselor, as our binge eating specialist at Green Mountain. Carrie's been working with disordered eating for 23 years with particular emphasis on binge eating. She co-authored the acclaimed book, Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat for Binge Eating. And at the end of tonight's presentation, we'll be giving away a free copy to someone here tonight. We're pleased to be able to offer this webinar with Carrie to help you better understand the underlying factors that lead to binge eating and how to better manage it. So I'll turn the program over to Carrie now.
Thank you, Marcia. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that you took the time to tune in tonight. And I wanted to let you know up front that we'll take some time periodically throughout the webinar for you to ask questions. And you can either raise your hand saying that you want to ask a question, or you can type in the chat a question as well. So I wanted to let you know that. As we're looking at this picture here, this is actually a scene from Green Mountain at Fox Run, and I think that this picture was taken about the same time as it is right now, because you can see that the fall leaves are starting to pop, and I'm recognizing this picture. We're going to be in full golden bloom here soon. I want to talk about my story first. Why am I so passionate about binge eating? Why is this something that I have really dedicated my career and my life to helping others that have this? Essentially, it's because about 38 years ago, I found myself in a dark basement, leaned up against a chest freezer. It was warm on my back, but I had a box of frozen Twinkies in my lap, and I was eating one or gnawing on it one by one by one. And I thought to myself, if anybody caught me here doing this, I'd be incredibly humiliated. But I also was comforted by it. It was a mindless trance that I would go into. And I would do this even though I felt so horrible afterwards. Now we speed up to 2013, just last year, and finally in the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, they recognize this disorder, binge eating disorder. And back then in the 70s, no one knew what this was. I certainly didn't. I thought I was just really crazy in the way that I was thinking and behaving, and I was incredibly ashamed of it. Luckily for me, I was able to get some help about 10 or 12 years later, and at that time I was treated for what they called non-purging bulimia. And so my recovery went, and luckily I have been blessed to go back and get my master's and now doctorate in psychology and looking at what really is going on here. And that's what I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you both my experiences and understanding, but also the research that has been evidenced in terms of what we can do to heal. And I definitely have had healing, especially in the last 10 years when mindful eating has come front and center in terms of a process for healing and having a relationship with food. So my outline tonight is I'm going to be talking about the behavior itself, the purpose of the behavior, the treatments that are available and that are most evidence-based, And again, the pathway to healing. You can have treatment, but not necessarily a pathway to healing. So I'm going to address that. So let's first talk about the behavior. And the three questions that I want to answer today is who develops it, what does it look like, and why does it go unnoticed? So oftentimes our childhood experiences kind of start the course of this behavior. And I was one that started very early, and at the age of 8, I learned very quickly that if I could eat sugar, and I used to take sugar packets off of the tables at restaurants, and then I would put them in my pockets, and then I would later go, and when I was by myself, I would just pour that sugar right down my throat. And I realized that when I did that, I went from a high level anxiety to a lower level of calm. And so that was a very reinforcing experience for me. So I had emotional eating as in childhood, and that we find is a risk factor. It also runs in families. Others, people in families will share certain types of brain behavior in terms of being able to recognize hunger and satiety, and these are things that can be trained, but we might not have an acuity or a keen sense of these cues within our bodies. Specific risk factors might be being of a larger size as a child, being teased or bullied, having stressful family or other traumatic types of situations. And I wanted to mention that trauma can only be defined by the person that experiences it. We oftentimes talk about big T's and little T's here at Green Mountain, and basically what it means is if you felt it to be trauma, it was. We also tend to have personality features that are in common with those that acquire binge eating problems. We tend to seek out structure. We like to follow directions. It's kind of like, just tell me what to do and I'll follow it, because we don't have this inner sense of trust. We tend to be perfectionistic, extreme in our thinking, black and white, good or bad. We tend to have lower self-esteem, maybe problem socializing or interpersonal struggles in terms of being vocalizing our feelings or setting boundaries with others. And we especially overvalue weight and shape in the sense of how we feel about ourselves, meaning that if we are overweight or we don't look the way, our bodies don't look the way in which we would like them, then we completely devalue ourselves and not looking at other things that would attribute to our value. And I think that a lot of this comes from social cultural influences. I think that we live in a culture that highly values what we look like and the size of our bodies. Interesting enough, though, we get double messages because we're a society that's obsessed with food. And the multi-billion-dollar diet industry is taking advantage of us. And they know that we're going to be hooked into that, especially those of us that want to follow directions or tell me what to do. The advertising, the media. We also have a healthcare system out of good have really come in and created fear around almost exaggerating health risks, especially associated with what they call obesity. We've had these obesity campaigns, that they're don't have this happen, as if this could be the worst thing that could ever happen to you. And yet, there is study after study after study that shows that the size of our body is not directly related to our health and or our mortality rate. In fact, it has more to do with our behaviors and our level of fitness. Overvaluation of clean eating I hate this phrase, and it's become something of a moralistic issue, because if I'm not clean eating, does that mean that I'm eating dirty? So what does this look like? What does binge eating look like? Well, I think it's emotional eating on steroids. I mean, it's just, you know, emotional eating tends to be a precursor to binge eating. It just tends to get out of control. And that's a phrase that you're going to hear throughout, in terms of just this feeling of the food just gets a hold of us, at least the lure of the food. It's important to know that everyone eats emotionally once in a while. In fact, it is part of normal eating. Sometimes we eat more and sometimes we eat less. Sometimes we really like something and we might overdo it. But it's the way that we respond to this, those of us that have a tendency to binge eat or emotionally eat, it's how we respond to it that's really key. It's also, in terms of the eating process, it's a go-to for managing all of our emotions, that we don't have a big toolkit, if you will, in terms of what to do when we're stressed out. It's our go-to. And then I believe that binge eating is something that becomes so destructive to us, both physically, emotionally, and I think spiritually. It's very damaging to our hearts, literally and figuratively. Binge eating often goes with other types of disorders like depression or anxiety. Anxiety is actually one of the most prevalent disorders or commonalities between those of us that have binge problems. Impulsivity. Substance use goes with that, and often ADHD. We also can have co-occurring medical conditions, metabolic syndrome, PCOS, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, gallbladder disease, as a result of the heavy load of food at any one specific period of time. So what does it look like? Well, binge eating can sometimes be an eating disorder. You have to meet a certain criteria in order for it to be a disorder or considered a disorder. But I want to make it clear right now that if anyone is experiencing binge eating, even if they don't meet the diagnostic criteria, they're in a prison. This is something that is it creates such self-loathing and shame and distress, and so I guess I want to say is don't minimize your experience if you don't meet the criteria. So binge eating disorder, or we sometimes call it BED, is when binge eating becomes a pattern over time, a pattern of behavior. And as I mentioned in my introduction, that it became a standalone eating disorder in 2013. And it is the most common of all eating disorders. In fact, anorexia and bulimia combined does not match the number of people that have binge eating disorder. And yet, I believe it's the most misunderstood and, we know, the most undertreated. And I also, it's important to understand that it actually is more like an eating disorder, like bulimia, but it's not, because there isn't any compensatory behavior such as purging. But it's more like that than somebody that compulsively overeats to the point of having a large body size. The diagnostic criteria is that eating amount of food in a discrete period of time that's definitely larger than most would eat in a similar period of time under similar circumstances. I always find that definition interesting. I'm sure that they labored over this in a room trying to decide, maybe people that never even have had binge eating disorder. But here's the key. You have a sense of lack of control over eating during that episode. Now, it's not that there's aliens come in and occupy your body and take you over, but it's this feeling as if you've been kind of removed from yourself and you don't have full control over what you're doing. Your mind might say, you really need to stop, you really need to stop, but you just keep going until the food is gone. It's a feeling that you cannot stop or control what or how much that you're eating. Now, binge eating episodes are also associated with 3 or more of the following. Eating much more rapidly than normal, and sometimes that's out of, I don't want to get caught, somebody might be coming home, but it might be because you're just so entrenched in this trance-like state that you're not even paying attention of how quickly that you're eating. Eating until you're uncomfortably full, and even eating until you're in pain, even though you know you're in pain. It doesn't make any rational sense, but we're not talking about rationality, we're talking about emotion. Eating large amounts of food when not feeling physically hungry, feeling alone or eating alone because you're embarrassed by how much you're eating. Remember I talked about if anyone saw me do this, I would be just humiliated. And then after, feeling so disgusted with yourself, so depressed, guilty over after eating. Other criteria is that the binge eating occurs on average at least once a week for 3 months. That the binge is not associated, as I mentioned before, with any inappropriate compensatory behavior such as vomiting or overuse of laxatives, and that you cannot be, you don't meet the criteria for other eating disorders such as anorexia or bulimia. So why does this go so unnoticed? If it's the most prevalent eating disorder, right? And so why is it that when I talk to people, they look at me and they go, I thought I was the only one. There's such a sense of relief. I remember when I first heard about what binge eating disorder was, and this was even after I had received treatment and was, in recovery per se, I started crying. I teared up because I thought, wow, there's a name for this. This is very real. This isn't just about me. Binge eating goes unnoticed because people who have it don't readily disclose it. They don't shout off the rooftops and say, hey, this is what I'm doing in private. And many with binge eating disorder eat normally around others, and they may be kind of known to be kind of restrictive in eating or even yo-yo dieting. But what they do in private is altogether something else. Maybe even eating normally out at a party or at a restaurant, but then stopping on the way home and going through a drive-through and then binging on that food. Not all people with binge eating disorder are of higher weight. It all depends on the compensatory behaviors, such as excessive exercise or dietary restraint or diets or restricting following a binge eating episode. So oftentimes, but it doesn't take away the crazy head and the prison that we feel in and in terms of obsession and the pain of the time in which we binge. In fact, we have some what we would consider normal weight participants in our program, and yet their pain is just as real as others. And oftentimes there's somewhat of a reverse discrimination because they go, well, what do you know about it? Well, they know a lot about it. And so it really isn't about the size of our bodies. It is more about the pain that we feel in this relationship with food. However, through time, the long-term course of this disorder is most people begin, if they've had it for a very long time, begin to have problems with obesity or just gaining weight and being of large size. The wrong prescription is another reason why this goes unnoticed. Paradoxically, healthcare providers encourage weight management strategies. Traditional, where the diet or the restriction, following a strict meal plan, eat this and not that, And this, they may be unknowingly triggering the symptoms. So really focusing on weight actually perpetuates this shame cycle. It looks like we have a question. It says, I thought that excessive exercise was a way of purging and would be bulimia. Well, not in itself. It can be considered a way of purging, but in terms of qualifying as bulimia, it can't be standalone. Um, so if you're just binging and exercising the calories off or even restricting some, there really has to be some sort of behavior in terms of purging, like vomiting, diuretics, laxatives, something of that nature in order to be bulimia. But that's a good question. It is a form of purging, though, for some. So especially if it's directly linked to I eat this and then I exercise right after. So I want to talk about the purpose. This is very key in terms of, I've often said that the key to treatment has to do with the function or purpose of the behavior. And so as a behavioral analyst, I look at this in terms of that there is a reason why that somebody is doing this, and that can give us a lot of information about how to stop it. So the question would be, why do we do it? Why can't we just stop? Or don't we know it hurts us in the long run? Of course. Of course we do. I think it's so important to emphasize that this behavior is reasonable and understandable given someone's needs or life circumstances. And as somebody that's treated eating disorder for a couple decades or more, I've never met anyone who didn't have a good reason for their eating disorder. And that's a key point in healing, is really knowing that, is to know that, hey, you know what? I do know how to manage stress. I do know how to take care of myself. One of the things that I often hear in Vermont, I moved here from Arizona, so this has been quite a shock in terms of living in this environment. Well, one of the things I noticed, the first thing I noticed is it's really green out here. There's a reason why they call it the Green Mountains. But it's green because there's water. There's water everywhere. You're driving down a road and you can either look to the left or the right and there's a stream there. And I really am enjoying this. But it brings me to this metaphor, or this story that I like to tell. It goes with the of course. And what it is that if you imagine in your life that your life becomes like a rapid, like the rapids in a stream. And if you've ever been whitewater rafting or kayaking or even around rapids, that water can become very powerful, so much that it can suck you under and you can't breathe and you have to pop up and take a breath, and then maybe you get pushed up against a rock. They call these kind of eddies, and you can't move, you're paralyzed. So imagine yourself in your life, you've got caught in these rapids, and you look upstream and you see a log, and this log is coming down the stream, and you see it and you go, oh, there's a log. Thank goodness there's a log. And so the log comes along and you grab a hold of it and you get up on top of the log, and it literally has saved your life. And you're riding this log and you ride it and you ride it and you ride it, and pretty soon you might come to still waters. And there you are in still waters, and you're sitting on a log and you're looking out at the shore, and out on the shore you see other people living their life. Your life has become kind of small because you're on the log and you don't have very much to do on the log. It limits you. Okay? And then you have to make a decision. Do I stay on the log where it saved my life? It's very comfortable. And yet, I want to live out there on the shore. And I liken the eating disorder to a very big log that comes along when you're in the rapids. And so, of course, this is something that has been very dear to us. At the same time, it really limits us, and at some point we may need to decide to learn to swim and go to shore. I have another question. I'm very overweight and diabetic. I have periods when I control my food, then it becomes difficult about 3 or 4 weeks, and instead of purging like I would do when I was younger, I now eat and then spit out large amounts of food. Is this common? I feel so much shame about it. Actually, chewing and spitting is becoming more and more common than people know. You know, it's kind of an answer to a problem. You know, you're just trying to find solutions, right? You're finding comfort in the taste of the food, and yet you're trying to get rid of some of the calories that might go with that food. But what I'm seeing here is that you say it becomes difficult after 3 or 4 weeks. And I think that it's very much like a diet. If you liken that chewing and spitting to a diet, it's kind of a structure or a solution to the problem, but you're not really addressing the problem. Okay. And what we know about diets or a solution such as that is it does get harder and harder and harder. And oftentimes I hear, it's not uncommon to hear that somebody can only go 3 or 4 weeks without falling off of the diet or whatever they've chosen to, and we kind of white knuckle it until we fall off. The thing that we like to teach here at Green Mountain and my philosophies that are addressed in the book is that if we really address what's really going on with the behavior and change our relationship with food, right? We have a better relationship with food, with our body. We become more mindful. In the long run, it may be hard and difficult in the beginning, but it does get easier and easier. So I'm glad that you've shined the light on your issue, and I just applaud you for taking that risk. Let's look at some of the purposes. It soothes, calms, and numbs. Hallelujah. Of course it does. It works. Don't let anybody tell you that it doesn't work, because it does, at least for a little while. Our physical and emotional states are altered through binge behavior. Let me talk about this for a little bit, this mechanical process. When I talk about mechanical, I talk about the process of digestion. The crunching, the chewing, the swallowing, digesting, the distension of the bowel, this whole digestive pathway holds emotion. In fact, we have seen studies that show that this crunch, 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 crunch really is kind of soothing to bring us from a higher level of anxiety or stress to a lower level. So if you find yourself crunching, you may have anxiety. You may be stressed. Now, carrots don't seem to do it for us. You know, that's why we go for the salty, the crunchy chips and things like that. The other thing is that as we chew, we loosen our jaw, and oftentimes we hold anger or frustration in our jaws. As we swallow, right, we feel that going down our throat, which distracts us from any emotion that might be held in our throat, right? We often kind of swallow down emotion. The whole digesting and the distension of the bowel, the stretching of the stomach like you're blowing up a balloon and it pushes some of the organs around to make room. Or did you know that our bowels are about the length of a garden hose, all twisted up inside of our bellies? And so this whole distension and process of digestion after we've eaten a lot takes away that feeling kicked in the stomach with pain of loneliness or any other emotion that we might feel in this whole area of our digestive tract. So it really is good in terms of distracting. chemically, this food can flood the pleasure centers, releasing these feel-good compounds throughout our body. This is a systemic type of a process that occurs. And so, again, we have figured out a very good way to calm and soothe and numb. The other purpose would be through dissociation or distraction. Now, I'm not talking about a dissociative disorder where we actually switch into a different state, but what we do is go into a trance-like state. And this is very good. It's kind of like we flip a switch. It's like when we flip the switch, I'm going away for a little bit. I'm going to go away with my food. It's to escape emotion, to escape thinking about the long-term consequences of what I'm doing right now. If I really thought about what I'm doing, it would be too hard. In fact, I've often said that mindfulness and binging are they can't coexist. Okay? So it's a good way to procrastinate. It's a good way to escape my critical thoughts that keep telling me that I'm not good enough and I need to try harder and I can't believe you did that. And so what happens here is it's a really kind of me time, escape my problems for a little while, and it works very good in that way. Why can't we just stop this? Just stop it. Well, a habit. Habits are very powerful. You know, there's not always deep-seated reasons why we do this. It could be that, for instance, when I mentioned when I was younger that I figured out pretty quickly that sugar could take me from a state of high anxiety to a state of calm. Well, every time I get to a state of calm after having induced my sugar, right, that's a reinforcement. And the more that happens, the more it becomes entrenched. Remember the picture I showed when we first started the webinar of Okemo Mountain? It was just kind of starting to turn. I know that in a few months there's going to be snow on that mountain. I'm kind of excited about that. People snicker because they know that I'm from Arizona and they don't know. They think that she doesn't know what she's getting into here. But I'm really up for the adventure. But let's just take a look at that mountain. That mountain is snow-capped and it has snow, and then we get to something here in Arizona called mud season. I understand. Basically, it's when the snow melts and the water runs off the mountain. So let me ask you this. In terms of how does the water know where to go? How does it know? Well, it's typically the path of least resistance. It's going to go where it's always gone before. And that's kind of like the neurotransmitters in our brain and the neural pathways, if you will, okay, is that they have been established for the path of least resistance. So it's easier to do what you've always done, right? We're hardwired for the ease of survival, okay? In fact, we really want to learn to do things automatic because if we really had to stop and think about things, especially in primitive times, we might have been gobbled up. So something that kept us alive now can be a problem for us because we typically can go into automatic pilot easily. I think it's quite scary when I go into automatic pilot when I'm driving. If I've driven the same route over and over and over again, sometimes we kind of check out and an automatic takes over. And we may do this in many other situations. So that's why it's hard to stop, is because we've made these trenches. And in order to get out of it, and that's what I meant when I was talking about how it gets easier and easier, but it's hard in the beginning when we're trying to change these pathways, these neural pathways of behavior, is that we have to get out the shovel, and in some sense we have to get out a backhoe if it's really entrenched. But it can be done, and I want to give hope here because I know that where something was very difficult for me before has become easier and easier, and it just takes practice. So, but it's the long-term solution, because any of us can do something for 3 to 4 weeks. And some of us that have felt so defeated by the reoccurring prescription of the diet that people just don't understand that this isn't working for us, and we feel such failure each time we try to do it over and over again. We may even not even last to the afternoon with our good intentions, and that's no way to live. So it's really important to know that this behavior serves in a very important function. It also can keep us safe. Binge eating may be a valuable tool in helping us protect ourselves from harm or rejection or failure, even power or other threatening situations. See, we create a strong belief system. There's little people inside of us, really, that have memory of something that's happened. And we may have told ourselves unconsciously, I am never going to let that happen to me again. I will never want to feel that way again. And yet, on a conscious level, we can feel so motivated to make change, right? We can say, okay, this time I'm going to do it. But why is it that we get to, the pathway where it splits and we have to decide, okay, am I going to go in this direction and do what I've always done, or I'm going to go in this direction and do something different? And why is it when we say we want to do something different that we default and do something that we've always done? There might be a belief system that's kind of underneath going on that's protecting you from pain, protecting you from repeating something, a memory of something that's happened. So oftentimes it's an unconscious decision. And so part of mindfulness is what will help us pause and let us face this, this choice and know what's going on. And in that instance, we can reassure ourselves and almost reparent ourselves to it's going to be okay, right? It can be different. That was a memory. We don't have to live a memory. We can live in now. But we have to recognize that that's going on. So don't we know that it hurts us in the long run? Well, of course we know that it hurts us. But you know what? Fear is a very powerful thing. So even if something hurts you in the long run, our brains are wired for survival, and they're trying to protect, it's trying to protect us. So if we have this perceived threat, maybe it's a threat of not getting enough or going hungry or something that, and we go, wow, I need to take care of myself and do this thing that protects me, even though in the long run it hurts. But fear isn't rational. No anxiety is rational, right? The little spider in the corner that we jump up on the chair and go, eek, right? Is that rational? But it's very real. The person that can't get on an airplane because they have a panic attack. Now, the likelihood of the plane going down, that's not real, but fear is real. I can remember a time that my husband talked me into going up one of these zip line things. Well, I have an anxiety disorder anyway, but I go up and I'm climbing this pole to get to the platform, and all of a sudden, I couldn't move my arm, and I couldn't uh, move my legs. I was paralyzed. I tried. Everything in my head. I was telling my brain to move my arm, and it wouldn't move. That's the power. That's the power of fear. Okay? And so we have to realize and not judge ourselves that until we feel that whatever is a threat to us, right, until we feel safe, we might not be able to change. In some cases, binge eating can serve as punishment. You know, for some, especially those that have trauma histories, may even use binging as a form of punishment. Someone might hate themselves so much or have such self-loathing that they might punish themselves by binge eating. And the very act of binging can be abusive, stuffing yourself until it hurts or creates pain. It's very distracting. It's almost like the concept of cutting, right? I want to escape the pain by creating and distracting by another pain. Some of us just punish because we're not being perfect on our diets. So I can't believe I failed again, so let me just hurt myself by eating more and more. So what is the treatment? Finally, some good news. What works? Well, what we know that doesn't work is focusing on weight. We know that stopping the behavior, right, is actually a predictor of success and maintenance, and actually better weight management in the long run. So it suggests that the treatment of the binge eating is the priority over focusing on your weight, right? So don't look at the symptom, right? Let's just look at the behavior. And you know what? You can directly change your thinking and behavior, but you can't change a number on a scale. In fact, that's just gravity. That's just this metal object, right? Isn't it amazing how sometimes you can feel really bit good? You got out and did a brisk walk in the morning, and you're putting good things in your body, and you're feeling strong and empowered, and then you step on a scale, and all of a sudden you feel crappy. That's not fair. That's a piece of metal that's telling you that you're not. It's so invalidating. It's saying you don't feel good. You have no reason to feel good, and yet you do. And we need to trust ourselves. If we feel good, we feel good. It doesn't have anything to do with our weight. So what works? Facing the giants. What that means is that, we can identify those many faces that are protecting the function of our eating disorder. That we can learn to reparent and talk kindly with self-compassion. We can calm and reassure ourselves by developing this voice, kind of coursing yourself. It's like, well, of course you want to do that. That makes sense, right? Remember that it's reasonable, that you would want to do that. The first thing I do when someone says that I shouldn't do it, or that's stupid, or that doesn't make sense, I shut down and I freeze, and I don't change. I don't move. So I believe that the start of the change process is really validating. We need to realize that eating disorder or the disordered eating has been there for us, and of course you did it. You needed it. It worked. Okay. Don't be afraid of validating that. It doesn't mean that you're going to just go for it. Actually, it gives you the resolve to say, yeah, okay, I'm going to be okay, and I'm ready to change. Cognitive behavioral therapy, in fact, traditional CBT, is actually the most widely researched method of treating binge eating disorder. And this is where we realize that our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are very much attached. And if we can slow things down enough and pause, we can realize that that's just a thought. I don't have to act on my thoughts, right? That's just an emotion or a feeling. It's not going to kill me, right? That we don't have to move to a behavior. We can just acknowledge it. Dialectical behavioral therapy is actually a form of CBT, but it's based on the concept of dialectics. Now, dialectics is this concept that combines both acceptance and change. So seemingly opposite stances can both be true at the same time. So therefore, one can be deemed completely acceptable, understandable, and at the same time know that it needs to change and we need to move forward. So it's this middle stance. It's moving out of black and white, from extreme thinking into both and. So I like to teach those that I work with and coach. I like to say, how about if we use the terminology of Sometimes I do this, but mostly I do that. That it's not an always or never, because life doesn't have to be in extremes. In fact, it's a much gentler path if we just move a little bit closer to the middle. Mindfulness, and this is a quote from John Kabat-Zinn, one of the fathers of mindfulness, the ability to be aware of your thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and actions in the present moment without judging or criticizing yourself for your experience. Whew, what a concept, right? It's a being wide awake, right? And accepting what is. We don't have to judge everything. We don't have to judge every thought we have, every behavior, every person that comes in our life. It's not a moral issue. It's really what we're doing is we're not giving license to this, what I call the charging something with emotion and taking it to the movies. When I say taking it to the movies, it's like we think of something and then we place an emotion on it and then we get all like, oh, and then this might happen and then they'll do this and then that would happen and oh my goodness, and then pretty soon we're in a movie and we're not living real life in the here and now. So mindfulness-based approaches provide individuals with a heightened ability to simply observe their feelings and experiences and take charge of their decisions without reacting automatically. It actually cultivates a wiser and more balanced relationship with yourself, with your eating, with your body. Mindfulness seems like a hard thing to do, but it's really easy in concept. It's just harder to apply it because I think that oftentimes we make it harder than it needs to be. We're wired to judge things, to analyze, to be doers. Just being, right? I say instead of letting go seems really hard, but just letting be is a little easier. So lastly, let's talk about this pathway for healing. Yes, it does take time. And so being patient with ourselves, it gets easier and easier, not harder and harder like diets. And acknowledging that there is a little bit of grieving that may have to take place. Saying goodbye to that log is hard to do. You need to learn to swim, develop this confidence and competence through experimentation, right? The goal would be that I can look at food without fear, that I can accept myself with love without judgment. Replacing the function that it served is really important. So learning new skills and tools to manage our thoughts and feelings, our environmental triggers, our emotional and physical triggers. And where that comes is reducing our vulnerability through essential self-care. It's kind of like we call this kind of a cushion that we create. And some of the most basic things that we don't give ourselves, like sleep and rest, could really create some vulnerability for us when it comes to trying to manage all that life throws at us. Eating predictable and nourishing meals mindfully. Movement and just physical activity. Breathing. Sometimes we forget to breathe. We do this shallow breathing and we take a deep breath and go, wow, that felt good. Finding a safe, supportive environment to heal with people that get you, very important. Mindfulness and stress management are important too. And knowledge. Knowledge is so empowering because it gives us choice. When we go mindlessly through things and don't pay attention and we're on automatic pilot, that's not empowering. Knowledge of knowing ourselves and knowing some of the alternatives that we can do so we can stop and go, okay, what do I want to do here? And what is my intention for the future? I want to be able to play with my grandchildren. I enjoy bicycling without getting out of breath. I like how I feel when I feed myself fruits and vegetables. These are the types of things that essential self-care mean. There's three other things that happen in terms of keys to change. This comes from what we call a health behavior philosophy or principles. 3 things that I feel that are very key to somebody being successful in their healing process and change. And that is autonomy. Autonomy in your relationship with food, which means an ability to choose any food, anytime without fear or guilt. Learning to trust yourself with food. It is possible. Having competence and in your ability to respond to whatever life brings you in the moment without needing to turn to food. And the relatedness to others that get you, right? You don't have to explain yourself. Being with people that have experienced what you experience, that can support you in your journey of healing, is really important. And I see this every day as I coach these women here in our Pathway program at Green Mountain Fox Run, is that they feel so safe with others that understand exactly what they're going through, and learning from one another. It's very powerful. So this is what freedom looks like. It's very possible for you to be free from this prison of obsessing about food, when to eat, what to eat, if I ate it, how I terrible feel, and when am I going to stop doing it. It opens you up to a whole new life. Now here's the mountain again in a different season. Looks like spring has sprung. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take any questions that somebody might have. We've got a few minutes, and I'd love to be able to personalize this for you in any way that I might be able to help. You can either type something or even raise your hand, and Laura will unmute your mic. You can always email me, Carrie@fitwoman.com. You might not have a question right now, or maybe don't feel like you want to bring that up right now, but definitely feel free to email me, and I will get back to you. I get, after these webinars on Wednesday nights, I get quite a few emails, and I really enjoy listening to people and trying to give them some guidance. Okay, we've got a question. I'm confused about the difference about binge eating and compulsive eating. Well, you know, there's a fine line there. Binge eating is comes you know, sometimes we use them synonymously. The emotional eating can very easily become binge eating. Compulsive eating would be there's a feeling that being pulled towards something. Remember that idea that I can't stop once I start. You know, I really don't think that getting caught up in the semantics of it is as important as what your experience is and how it feels for you. So I just think that whatever you want to call it, it's painful. Okay. Binge eating, of course, in order to be binge eating disorder, has to meet the criteria that I laid out for you. Question, are you going to do the program of CEU credits again? Well, actually, this program that we're doing it does not really qualify for CEU credits at this point. Maybe sometime in the future we might have some professional training available But right now, we're just trying to reach people that are affected by this personally and try to first validate them that you're not alone and that this is a real thing. And two, that there is help. And three is that Green Mountain is actually dedicated to helping people just like you. So I think it's important to know that there are therapists out there and there are programs out there that can help you, and Green Mountain is one of them. Any dying needs out there? How do you manage best the moments of despair that occur when you stop numbing yourself in food and take a hard look at what lies ahead in getting healthy? Be so gentle with yourself. I believe that I healed out of love and compassion. And mindfulness, the the theory is really comes from a place of compassion. And so I think that if we can recognize and nurture ourselves and think of this as nurturing ourselves into a stronger me, right, through taking care of myself and from talking gently to myself and reparenting myself to a place where I don't have to listen to the critical, restrictive voice in my head that tells me what I should and shouldn't do with food, or that I need to exercise in a certain way, and that I'm not being pulled in by this other voice that says, that's very cunning and luring, that says, oh, just a little won't matter, go for it. But that we don't listen to that anymore, right? We hear it, it's in the background, but what has been replaced is this complete voice of that loves you and that wants the best for you and encourages you to make really good decisions for yourself based on your own values. Is Green Mountain a 12-step program? No, actually, we are based on cognitive behavioral methods and education and experiences of learning to know your body through mindfulness. And so you may find that in a spiritual experience for yourself, especially in the setting that we're in. It's quite peaceful, and nature tends to do that, but no, we are not a 12-step program. I have something here that says, I spent a month at Green Mountain a couple months ago before you arrived. How is it different now that I'm there? I am a binge eater since I was a toddler, and I still struggle. Well, what's different at this point, and the company has brought me in as a specialist and a coach, and essentially what I'm doing is I have a program within a program that helps support, it's called the Pathway, and I help support those that want some specialized care. I give them a special one-on-one assessment, and I analyze their behavior from childhood and all the way up, and understand how that functions and for them and the purpose of that binge behavior, and help them, point them in the right direction in terms of a pathway to healing. This is how can Green Mountain help somebody with binge eating disorder, and how long should you stay? Well, because at this point we're not a full treatment center, and that's our hope, is to go into that direction. What we can do is get you a really good start. And the longer that you stay here, the more that you become immersed and entrenched in a new way of living, a new way of thinking. So your stay, depending on how long you stay, it's based on a 4-week program, but there are shorter stays and longer stays. How does alcohol affect the problem? I like to start a binge with wine. Well, basically what you're doing, remember we talked about this concept of detaching and going into a trance. What you've done is you've created a vulnerability of kind of going someplace else, so you don't have to recognize and be fully present with what you're deciding to do. So that's not really uncommon. Another question, I'm going to just have to, you guys are really giving me some questions now, which is great, and I know that we're going to have to wind up here pretty soon. This one last question is, has Gestalt therapy or experiential therapy been successful in treating binge eating? Well, that form of therapy has not been tested or proven evidence-based, but in terms of experiential therapy, this idea, remember I talked about autonomy, the more that you can experiment with understanding my body and how certain foods react in me, how I feel after I eat certain foods, listening to my body in terms of movement and being more attached from a mindful perspective, the more that you can experience or experiment with different activities and knowing yourself, the more confident that you can become with being autonomous in the choices that you make for yourself. Wow, a lot of good questions. So again, if you have more questions, I really encourage you to email me. If you want to know about Green Mountain or our Pathway program, I can answer your questions. We also have some people that if you call in, they will either talk to you if they're available or they'll call you right back and they'll answer as many questions that you have. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn this back over to Marcia, and she is going to close us for tonight.
Thank you, Carrie. That was an excellent overview of the reasons that underlie binge eating and how to begin to overcome it. It's so clear, it just shines through how much you understand the problem and makes it very clear how the women who you're working with at Green Mountain really do respond and find so much value in what you're working with them on. I want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us tonight. Also, we do hope that what you've learned here has been helpful in healing. Wanted to announce the winner of Carrie's book, Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat for Binge Eating. It's Karen Butterfield. And Karen will be contacting you by email this week so we can send it out to you right away. And I just want to close by saying that for more than 40 years, Green Mountain has transformed the lives of thousands of women who struggle with binge eating. And we do invite you to learn more about our Healthy Weight Management Center in Ludlow by contacting us at info@fitwoman.com. And we do hope you'll pass the word on about our free webinar to other women who might be looking for freedom from binge eating. We do have one scheduled again for next Wednesday night at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So with that, I just want to say thanks again for joining us and have a great night.
Hello and welcome to the Binge Eating 101 webinar. We are so glad that you could join us this evening. I am Erin Rishis, Program Director at Green Mountain at Fox Run. Green Mountain is a women's healthy weight center in Vermont that pioneered the non-diet approach to healthy weight management more than 40 years ago. We've been working with women who binge eat because the behavior is commonly seen in those who struggle with weight. We recently have enhanced our focus on binge eating by bringing on binge eating disorder specialist Carrie Anderson. Carrie has her doctorate in behavior health and is also a licensed professional counselor. She has been working with disordered eating for 23 years with particular emphasis on binge eating, and she also co-authored the book Eat What You Love, Love What You Eat for Binge Eating, At the end of tonight's presentation, we'll be giving away a free copy to someone who is in attendance tonight. So we are pleased to be able to offer this webinar with Carrie to help you better understand the underlying factors that lead to binge eating and how to better manage it. I'm now going to turn the program over to Carrie.
Thank you, Erin. Welcome, everybody. Wow, this is an exciting time for us here at Green Mountain. The slide that you're looking at here is looking out at Okemo Mountain. It's a ski mountain, and it's turning, it looks almost like this, even a little more golden. And so I just wanted to let you all know that we're already in fall. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to share my experiences, my passion, and my research with you tonight on binge eating. A little bit about my story. About 38 years ago, I found myself in a dark basement, leaned up against a chest freezer, eating a box of frozen Twinkies, one by one, chewing a 9. And basically, I felt humiliated, and at the same time, I felt comforted. I thought if anyone came down the stairs or saw me do this, I don't know what I would do. It was my secret. Back then, it was in the 70s, and it was about the late 70s that anorexia and bulimia started to get some notice. But binge eating disorder, although prominent, and I wish I would have known that I wasn't the only one, we find now, just last year in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association had identified it as a standalone eating disorder in their diagnostic manual. In fact, binge eating disorder is more prevalent than anorexia and bulimia combined. So it's the most prominent eating disorder, and yet it's the most unnoticed and underserved in terms of people being able to get help. And that's why Green Mountain is so dedicated to helping people and reaching out to them and validating that they're not alone. The outline here tonight is that I will be talking about the behavior, the purpose, the treatment, and the pathway to recovery. So the behavior, who develops this? What does it look like? Why does it go unnoticed? Oftentimes it develops in childhood and childhood experiences. In fact, it actually runs in families, but there are some specific risk factors. Having a larger size body as a child, being teased or bullied, having stress or trauma, starting to use food emotionally in childhood. I remember when I was about 8 years old, is the first time I can remember using food emotionally. And now at the time I didn't know that it was happening, but looking back it makes sense to me. I can remember when we were in restaurants with my family, I would steal the, sounds awful, but I would steal or take a handful of the sugar packets off of the restaurant table, and I would put them in my pockets. And then when I had a chance, I would go by myself in secret and go to the bathroom and lock the door, and I would pour those sugar packets down my throat. And I realized that it calmed me, that I went from a high level of anxiety to a state of calm. And so it was very reinforcing. And now I can remember that this is something that happened over and over and over again, and that is what we would call emotional eating. It was the binge eating that came later for me. Now, the certain personality features of people that acquire binge eating disorder or have the tendency to binge eat. We tend to seek out structure. We like things in a row. We like to follow directions. We reach out to people and say, just tell me what to do and I'll follow it. Because we like to achieve, and we tend to be perfectionistic. On the other hand, we may have low self-esteem or have some struggles, maybe socially or interpersonally. And a real key factor is that we tend to overvalue weight and shape in terms of our overall worth. And I thought everybody did. I thought that this is how most people thought, but it's not necessarily true. Also have a lot of socio-cultural influences. The advertising and media and culture that we live in is constantly bombarding us with images and slogans and pictures of a certain ideal, which is oftentimes not even real. With the photoshopping and the airbrushing, we're not really seeing what people really look like. We have a multi-billion-dollar diet industry. We tend to have even the public health system and healthcare system really putting out a lot of fear-based and exaggerated health risk around larger body sizes. They even have, in quote, obesity campaigns. And I think that oftentimes that these scare tactics are really causing a reaction and might be driving us toward food even more. There's also this trend of clean eating, and it almost has a moral flavor to it, as if we're not clean eating, that we might be eating dirty. Emotional eating plus. When I think about what does binge eating look like? Well, it's emotional eating on steroids. You know, everyone overeats emotionally once in a while. It's part of normal eating. But when eating is the go-to for managing all your emotions, and then when it becomes destructive to you, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, it may be binge eating. And binge eating often goes with other types of disorders: depression and anxiety, impulsivity, substance use or ADHD, and also has co-occurring medical conditions such as metabolic syndrome, PCOS, diabetes, maybe cardiovascular or gallbladder disease. High correlation with what we call lifestyle risk factors. It has more to do with the types of things that we're eating or our activity level. We know now that our BMI or our body fat levels have really very little to do with our health. And that's why I call them this scarcity approach of scaring us into fearing obesity. And I think the fear of it, again, is a problem for us. It can be an eating disorder. Binge eating disorder, otherwise known as BED, is when binge eating becomes a pattern of behavior that meets certain criteria. And as I mentioned in my intro, that a standalone eating disorder in 2013 was identified and recognized. Now, I remember when they first started talking about this, it was included in what we called eating disorder NOS, or not otherwise specified. And they started talking about and had work groups to determine whether or not binge eating was actually an eating disorder. And I remember exactly where I was when I started reading about this and hearing about this. And for me, having suffered from this in my teens and 20s, I remember even tearing up and thinking I wasn't alone, that there was a name for this. That's why I've had such passion to reach out to anybody that might be experiencing this so that we can help shine some light on it and validate this and get some help, because it really is treatable. In fact, I was able to get treatment in my mid to late 20s, and went on to back to school and went on to become an eating disorder therapist. The diagnostic criteria, the DSM-5, is very specific, but I want to clarify here. I want to make sure that if you're out there and you're saying, well, I don't fit all that criteria, it really isn't about labeling here. I want to give this to you, but anybody, if you have any of these symptoms, it really is a painful and a prison, really, of living in, of having to deal with this. And so regardless of whether it meets this criteria or not, I just want to make sure that you know that if there's any binging going on at all, that I know that it's a painful and emotional experience. So the criteria, though, is eating an amount of food in a discrete period of time that's definitely larger than most would eat in a similar period of time under similar circumstances. Wow. Basically, they're saying that it's not Thanksgiving, that we're eating like we might in those kind of circumstances. There's this sense of lack of control over eating during the episode. Now, aliens don't come down and take us over, and we really can stop, but it feels like we can't. We feel pulled and compelled to continue to eat until all the food is gone. It's that feeling that you cannot stop or control what or even how much you're eating. Also, binge eating episodes are associated with 3 or more of the following: eating much more rapidly than normal. Now, some people eat rapidly because they want to get rid of the food before they get found out or somebody comes home and catches them. Eating until feeling uncomfortably full, or eating large amounts of food when you're not even hungry, and especially eating alone because of being embarrassed by how much you're eating. And here's another important thing to understand about binge eating, is that you feel disgusted with yourself, depressed, and even very guilty about it. Now, I was also surprised to hear that not everybody feels that way when they overeat or they binge. And so that's a real determining factor as to whether or not this is a disorder. The other criteria would be that it occurs on average at least once a week for 3 months. And it's not associated with any recurrent use of what we call inappropriate compensatory behaviors, such as purging, vomiting, using excessive laxatives. So in order for it to be binge eating, it cannot meet criteria for anorexia or bulimia. So why do you think this goes so unnoticed when it's one of the most prevalent, or is the most prevalent eating disorder that there is? And that is because of the shame and secrecy surrounding this behavior. Binge eating disorder goes unnoticed because people don't readily disclose to others what they do in private. And many of us eat normally around others, or may exhibit like even restrictive eating or dieting in front of others. And yet when we're by ourselves is when we do the binging. Now I want to clarify that we use obesity as a clinical term, but it's something that we are very sensitive to in terms of use of this word here at Green Mountain, because we don't like to label people. We think that people come in all different sizes and shapes. But I want to say that not all people with binge eating disorder are of larger size. It really depends on some of their compensatory behaviors, not vomiting or laxatives, but things like maybe exercising or dietary restraint, or not eating or dieting strictly after a binge eating episode. But one thing that we know for sure is that the long-term course of this disorder is weight gain. The other reason it goes untreated is that it's given the wrong prescription. You know, paradoxically, providers encourage weight management strategies, and they may unknowingly be triggering the symptoms. We tend to, we know that diets don't work, and especially diets don't work with this binge eating population. We tend to react and actually pendulum swing away from the restriction. It really, focusing on the weight really perpetuates the shame cycle. So what is the purpose of binging? This is very important because I believe that if we can understand the reasons for it, we can understand what we need to do in order to heal it. So in looking at the purpose of binging, I want to look at why do we do it? Why can't we just stop? And don't we know it's hurting us in the long run? Okay. So why do we do it? Well, I like to use the term of course. Sounds like I'm having some problems with my headphone.
Hi everyone, this is Laura Brooks. I'm the technical advisor for this webinar. As Carrie straightens out her headphone issue, if you have any questions, don't be shy about entering them in. Carrie will have a question and answer session towards the end of the presentation, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. So Carrie should be back momentarily, but for the meantime, if you do have any questions, please feel free to either raise your hand or enter a question in the chat room. We'd love to hear from you. So Carrie seems to be coming back on the line. Carrie, are you there?
Can you hear me? Can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
I can hear
check.
you now.
Yes, it looks like I popped off. I'm sorry about that. I'm glad that I'm back. Did we get any questions in the meantime? Okay, I'll go ahead and start. So it's so important to emphasize that the behavior is reasonable and understandable given your needs and life circumstances. And something I've always said,
Hi everyone, we're sorry for the technical problem. Please hold on just another moment. We're going to try to adjust Carrie's microphone and headset. Again, if you have any questions, we've talked about any particular subject that you have experience with, even if you just like to make a comment, if there's any definitions or terms that you would like a little more information on, please feel free to enter a message in the chat or have a question. Okay, and we have one here. Have you observed people who have had an eating disorder before end up with a binge eating disorder so that the disorder shifts? I was borderline anorexic in high school, and I feel like I may have shifted to this binge disorder. Carrie, are you back on the line?
Yes, I believe I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Boy, I really apologize for this. That's a very good question. In fact, when I worked with anorexia and bulimia more predominantly than binge eating disorder, we often found that there is a continuum of eating disorder from restriction all the way to binging and somewhere in between. And oftentimes we know that restricting can set somebody up for binging at some point. That's why diets don't work. But let's say that it's a restricting type of an eating disorder. And so if you're restricting food, this feeling of deprivation really starts to come up, and we can only hang on for so long. Unfortunately, what happens is we don't just shift to normal eating. Oftentimes what happens is we shift from restriction all the way over to overeating. And part of that is our black and white thinking and all or nothing thinking, in the sense that I'm going to get this out of my system because I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to return back to restricting. So all the while that we're binging or overeating, we are thinking about getting, quote, back in control and into a restrictive state. And I've seen people that have had a very difficult time with getting themselves back to the middle. And that's really the treatment, is trying to normalize the eating pattern so that we're not moving to restriction or binging, that we're actually finding a middle ground. And we can do that through mindful eating, and I'll be talking about that a little bit more. So as I look at, again, why do we do it? There's a really good purpose for it. And I always like to talk about this mountain and stream metaphor that I have. I have a question, but I'm gonna finish this and I'll come back to the question. Thanks. We're up in Vermont. We have a lot of water. That's why it's so green. We call it Green Mountain. Okay. So there's water everywhere. And if anybody has ever been in white water, whether it be inner tubing, or whether we're in a white river rafting or kayaking or whatnot, we know that the rapids and whitewater is very, very powerful. In fact, it can suck you under and keep you under the water for long periods of time, or you can get pushed up against a rock in like an eddy, they call them an eddy situation, and almost paralyzed in that kind of situation. And I want you to imagine that if you had fallen into this river and got caught in the rapids, and that you could hardly breathe, and you come up for air and you take a breath, and then you get pushed down, and a very, very frightening situation. And can you imagine if you were in the rapids and you saw a log come down the stream, and you saw this log come closer and closer and closer to you, and you think, oh my goodness, it saved my life. So you grab onto that log and you hold on for dear life, and as soon as you can, you get up on top of that log and you start riding it down the stream. Now, what if that stream calms and gets to still water, and you're sitting out on this log and you're in still water, and you look out on the shore and you see life happening for everybody out there, and you think to yourself, that might be interesting to go out there, but I'm not going to leave this log. I don't even know if I can swim to shore. And what if I want back on the log after I've left it? Now think about the log as your eating behavior. It really saved you. You know, life is hard, and many of us have had harder lives than others. And knowing that that log or having that food serves a great purpose. So when people say that, you know, I don't cope well, you are coping well. You figured it out because it works. Now, it may not be working for you any longer. It may be that you're sitting on that log in still water and you're looking at shore, and your life has gotten very small. That's when we start looking at, okay, what is it that we need to help you prepare for in order to go live on the shore again? And so let's take a look at some of the purposes here. I have one question I'm going to answer before I move on. Okay, it says that they're unclear about regarding the reference made about metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and binging. That's a really good question. And what some of the research is saying is that when you binge eat, we put a very heavy load on our endocrine system. So let's say that we eat a large amount of carbohydrates, just for instance. And what happens is our blood sugar spikes because we've eaten all these simple carbs or all this load of food. We call it a high load to the system. Well, what happens then is that insulin is released, and it's trying very hard to get the blood sugar back down. That's what insulin does. And when we have these large insulin reactions to the high blood sugar from a load of carbohydrates, for instance, these are the things that create insulin resistance. And one of the issues that occurs, it's one of the symptoms in the metabolic syndrome, is insulin resistance. And we know that insulin resistance could also lead to diabetes. So binging puts a really a heavy load on the endocrine system, or the insulin reaction to a high blood sugar. So I hope that answers that question. So moving on to the purpose, I don't know, it looks like I got, let's see here. Okay, so as I mentioned before, when I used to use sugar to calm myself, it certainly does help. We know that food works to soothe, calm, and numb ourselves. Physical and emotional states are altered through binge behavior. And I like to break it up into two different types of alterations that binging does. And one is mechanically alters us physically and emotionally, and chemically. So let me talk about mechanically for a moment. The very act of crunching and chewing, crunch, 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 chew, 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 very relaxing for us. Do you know that the digestive system works in the parasympathetic nervous system? And that is what we call the rest and digest system of the nervous system, as opposed to the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight, flight, or freeze system. Okay? So by activating the mechanical process of digesting, the body starts to focus, to slow down, and to start focusing on eating and digesting. And so it's very calming in that way. We also, the act of swallowing, digesting, distension of the stomach and the bowel, filling it with food, can really distract ourselves from other emotions that might be manifesting themselves physically in our body. Now let me explain that a little bit more. We have emotion in our minds. Emotions start out cognitively, but they manifest and we feel them, or they are felt in the body. For instance, we might have a lump in our throat. We might have a rapid heartbeat or a tight chest. We might feel like we've gotten kicked in the stomach. Emotions are felt all in the area in which we swallow and digest our food. Chemically, food floods the pleasure centers of the brain and releases feel-good compounds all throughout the body in a systemic manner. And we know that these dopamine rushes from a load of what we call highly palatable foods, or the carbohydrates that are easily digested, run into the blood, becomes high blood sugar very quickly. And this can really release some feel-good hormones. The other reason or way that we can use binge eating is to help us to escape our emotions or even our thinking processes through dissociation distraction. Now, it's not dissociation in the typical sense that we think of, that somebody goes into a true fugue, or even a switching into a different state, that they're not in touch with reality. But we do dissociate in like a trance-like state. And so it's like going away for a little while. I just want to, I want my time, or me time. I want to escape. I want to escape the critical thoughts I might have, the to-do list, the maybe even the other emotions that might going on, the critical voices that talk to us all day long. Sometimes we just want to shut it off and go away. The other thing that it does, it helps us to escape thinking about the long-term consequences of our actions. Do you know that sometimes we'll say, I know I shouldn't be doing this, I don't care, I'll worry about it later. And then the switch gets flipped, and we kind of go away and we don't think about it until after we're finished, and then we're realizing what we have done. That's what we mean by dissociation and distraction. The other thing is, why can't we just stop? Well, habit is a really powerful thing. Now, that mountain that we were looking at in the very first slide, Okemo Mountain, I understand I haven't lived here during the winter, and I'm looking forward to this adventure, but I understand that this is covered with snow, okay? And so in the springtime, the snow melts and the snow turns into water. And I want to ask you, where does the water know where to go? Now, we know it has gravity, so it's going to go down, but where does water know where to go when it melts in the spring? Well, it takes the path of least resistance. It goes where it's always gone before. It's going to go in those crevices and down those creeks that once went, and down to the rivers that are. And so that's what our brains look like. We call them neural pathways. And we are hardwired biologically for ease of survival. And so our brain is actually always trying to figure out the path of least resistance, the easiest way. And once we start a pattern and we have this neural pathway, we can check out, right? We can be on automatic pilot. And I think all of you have probably experienced that at one time or another, when you've been driving someplace that you drive often, and you wake up and you're there and you go, I don't even remember driving here. Or maybe you're not even planning on going there that day, but because you drive it all the time, you end up there and you go, why did I take that exit? I'm not supposed to be going there. So that's a very good example of something that we've done habitually, right? That becomes something that we can do automatic without thinking about it. It worked for us in primitive times, when we really needed to be on our game, right? So we didn't get distracted by things. And if a tiger jumped out of the bushes, that we could react, and we didn't have to really think about it, okay? But it doesn't work for us very well anymore. So oftentimes we've never really learned how to do it any differently. You think about my situation, where when I was 8 years old, I was using sugar in order to calm myself. Do you know that I didn't have to learn how to calm myself in other ways? Because I figured out a way that worked very well at the time. So part of my recovery, and the part of what I'm suggesting that we need to do, is we need to start digging new trenches. And we may even have to bring out a backhoe once in a while. It may be difficult in the beginning when we're doing this, but as we build new pathways, it becomes easier and easier and easier. So think about this binging or emotional eating. It serves an important function. And it can be a valuable tool in helping us protect ourselves from harm or rejection or failure, even feeling too powerful or other threatening situations. We support these types of beliefs they develop, these belief systems develop when we're very young. Let's, for instance, let's say that that I had been rejected, and I had failed at something, and I felt really humiliated at some time in my life. At that time, I've created a protective belief system around that I told myself, I will never let myself feel like that again. And so we put up walls and we protect ourselves, and sometimes we insulate ourselves, maybe even with unconsciously we're doing that with our weight or our obsession with food or dieting. And then what happens, it becomes an unconscious decision when we're faced with a choice to do something differently. So if we have a choice of, I want to do what I've always done or do something differently, unconsciously, it may be a belief system that has been developed to protect you from harm that's unconsciously making this decision for you. So that's what happens when we say, I'm really motivated to change, I'm really motivated to do something differently, and then we find ourselves doing the same thing over again. Please don't feel badly about this. Please don't beat yourself up any further. What I always say, of course this has happened. As we become more mindful about the process that's unconscious and we bring it to the consciousness, we can intervene on what's happening there. So, don't we know it hurts us in the long run? Well, of course we do. But fear is a very powerful thing. Even if something hurts you in the long run, our brains are hardwired for survival. Any perceived threat is met with resistance. See, fear is not rational. Anxiety isn't rational. It's a part of the diagnosis of anxiety is to know that you know it's silly, but you're compelled to do it. Okay? So, I want you to be kind to yourself when understanding that. And binge eating may serve as punishment for some, especially those with some form of trauma history. We may use binging as a form of punishment. The very act of binging can be abusive. Stuffing yourself until it hurts and creates pain can be very distracting, similar to the function that some might use cutting. See, I'm going to be able to expose my pain by seeing it, or I'm going to hurt myself in another way so I don't have to feel the emotional pain. Some people just punish themselves because of the lack of perfectionism. I've heard over and over that someone says, when I overeat or I eat something that I told myself I shouldn't eat, I then began binging at that point, almost as a form of punishment for going off of my diet. This self-loathing is a real tendency for those that have binge eating disorder. So let's talk about something positive here, the treatment and what works. Because we know, and I've researched this and I've experienced this myself personally and with hundreds and hundreds of clients that I have worked with over the years, people can get better from this. Say is please don't focus on the weight. Focusing on the weight wakens up this rebellious part of us, this shameful part of us. And it's really not what's going on here. See, you can directly change your thinking of your behavior, but you cannot change a number on a scale. It's a piece of metal. Okay, so really de-emphasizing this, because the key is to start feeling confident and competent in your choices and your behaviors. So we also know that stopping the binge behavior is a predictor of successful maintenance and weight loss in the long run. So it always is a priority over weight loss. The other thing in terms of weight loss, and what works is facing the giants. It takes a lot of courage to get well, and I've seen a lot of people do that, but helping you to identify these faces that protect, that unconscious beliefs that protect you and protect the function of the eating disorder is really important. Learning to calm and reassure yourself by developing what we call a voice of self-compassion. So it creates a safe environment for change. If you had a little girl or a little boy and they were hurting, and they were doing a behavior that they thought was helping them, but it's ultimately hurting them, would you yell at them? Would you scream at them? Would you say, get over it? No, you wouldn't. And we treat ourselves like that. So part of getting well is learning to talk to ourselves as if we're reparenting ourselves. What it does, it calms us and reassures us that all is well. And then after being validated, we can feel safe to start changing and trying something different. Cognitive behavioral therapy, it's the most traditional and widely researched method for treatment for binge eating disorder. And dialectical behavioral therapy, it's considered a form of CBT. What dialectics means is that there's acceptance and change at the same time. Now that sounds kind of different, but its seemingly opposite stances can both be true at the same time. So therefore, one can be completely acceptable in their current state, but also need to change. See, it moves out of this black and white extreme thinking into what we call a both and approach, or a middle path approach. I like to use the term sometimes and mostly. So rather than focusing on anytime I do something wrong, I'll say, well, I mostly do things this way, but sometimes I do it this way. Instead of, I'm never going to get well, or I always blow it. No, sometimes I don't do it the way that I would like to, but I mostly do. And that kind and gentle approach has been very helpful. Now, mindfulness, according to one of the fathers of mindfulness is John Kabat-Zinn. Mindfulness is the ability to be aware of your thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and actions in the present moment without judging or criticizing yourself or your experience. Mindfulness-based approaches provide people with a heightened ability to simply just observe their feelings and experiences and then take charge of their decisions. It deactivates or disengages that automatic reactivity. And it cultivates a wiser and more balanced relationship with yourself, your eating, and your body. So what is the pathway to healing? Well, it takes time. And I think it's really important to be patient with ourselves, knowing that as we're creating new neural pathways, it gets easier and easier, not harder and harder like diets. You ever notice that? Do you ever notice that when you are trying to restrict or dieting and you're following something perfectly, that it just exhausts you? It does get harder and harder. But when you start to focus on changing behaviors instead of changing your food, that's right, you change your behaviors in the way that you think and feel and behave around food, rather than what you're eating necessarily. It's not, oftentimes it really isn't what you eat. It's how you're eating it and what all the decision making leading up to your eating and your food choices, and also what you do while you're eating and after you're eating. The other thing that happens in one of the pathway groups that we hold at Green Mountain, we really take a look at the grieving process. You know, saying goodbye really is hard to do. I think partly really appreciating, like we talked about the log in the story, is that it can really be your friend and save you in many ways. At the same time, this is a dialectic, and at the same time we know it's time to say goodbye. And so the grieving process is really important, and it takes time, as you know, to do that. Also, it's important to develop confidence and competence through experimentation. Part of mindfulness is not following what someone else tells you what to do, but listening to your own body, listening and experimenting with different things and saying, when I eat this or when I have too much of that, I feel this way and I don't like to feel this way, and my body prefers this, and I feel more energized when I do that. And so it's all a scientific experiment in getting to know and listen to your body. And some people look at me like I'm crazy and say, I can't trust myself. But believe me, part of this healing process is learning that you can trust yourself, and your body's pretty smart. It really is. We just need to learn to replace the function that it served. The other thing that we really emphasize here at Green Mountain is what we call essential self-care. Do you know that we can reduce the vulnerability to triggers, emotional triggers, environmental triggers, and physical triggers by just taking care of ourselves? Sleep and rest are the most basic and foundational things that we need to learn to do to take care of ourselves so that we don't turn to food. Having predictable, nourishing, and mindful eating, movement and physical activity, finding a safe, supportive environment to heal, being mindful, and creating some stress management strategies, getting knowledge that empowers you so that you can make good decisions for yourself. Did you know that autonomy, competence, and relatedness are some of the keys to change? When I was in my doctorate program, I spent a lot of time studying about behavior change. And what is it that those people that end up having long-term changes versus people that don't, and what are the characteristics of such people? Autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So our goals here is autonomy with our relationship with food, our ability to choose any food, anytime, without guilt or fear, is actually learning to trust yourself. Competence in your ability to respond to what life brings you in the moment without needing to turn to food. And this is very important. Relatedness to others, which means that I'm feeling connected with a group of people that get me and support me in my healing journey. And that is one of the things that I find that's so powerful in the Green Mountain program. In fact, I have a question about that here in my queue. It says, I'm coming to Fox Run in October for 1 week. Is the binge eating add-on available for the 1 week stay? Well, we tend to like to have people come for 2 weeks because 1 week is very, there's a lot going on and overwhelming. But I do have people come in for 1 week, and we can do that. And we just have to be very cognizant of making sure that I meet with you early on and have our one-on-one to help get you grounded and focused. So I want to definitely connect with you prior to you coming in so I can get you on my schedule. So we can, if you can email me, I'll have my email address up at the end here, and we can make that sure that is arranged. So this is what freedom looks like. And I just want to say that this is possible for you. And you know, it was possible for me. You know, my life's work has been driven by my passion to help people um, that struggle, that eat in dark basements. You might not be eating frozen Twinkies like I did, or eating sugar out of sugar packets, but I had it pretty bad. And I feel that if I can get well and go on and help people, then other people can get well as well. Do I have any other questions out there? Here's my contact information. My address, email address is Kari, Kari, at fitwoman.com, and you're welcome to email me. I get several people that email me after these webinars. Can we get a copy of the slides or info later? Actually, we have a recorded version, and thank goodness we have one recorded from earlier this month that didn't have our technical issues. I really do apologize for the sound issues today. Um, but anyway, we do have a copy that will be posted on our website. I have another question. I've been to Green Mountain. Is it a combination of regular eating, tuning in, and dealing with emotions? Is there something else, or just practice? I don't binge anymore, but I still overeat a lot, trying to find the middle ground between too little and too much. Well, I think that you really do have the key there. It really is just being persistent and hanging in and practicing, and knowing that you're not going to be perfect, and finding that if you're finding yourself too far over in the pendulum swing, that you just have to take tiny steps toward the middle. You know, it's just like, okay, instead of reacting and swinging over to a restrictive state, that if you, in response to an overeating, is just to get right back into a normal eating pattern, and not focusing so much on what happened, but being present in what you're doing today, because we can't bring back tomorrow, and we do spend a lot of time planning on how we're going to be perfect with our food in the future. Um, it's interesting, we had this discussion this week in our groups about how they call it future tripping in our group, but this idea that how many times while we're binging or overeating that we're planning when we're not going to do it, how long it's going to take to lose 2 pounds a week at 8 weeks, and da 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 da. And I mean, I hope you guys are kind of relating with this, but that's just insanity, because we're not being present in the moment. And that really is the key. It's just bringing us back, bringing back to being conscious and wide awake. Okay, so are there any good resources like books or websites to read, research further? Well, you can try, Binge Eating Disorder Association, or BEDA. I believe is bedaonline.com. You can find it's dedicated to helping people. The other thing is that if you could pick up a GURZE, GURZE, if you Google that, a GURZE catalog, it is just full of great resources for all eating disorders, all from a professional level to a lay person, for families, for children. That's a really great resource to check out. So I would look at I would look into that, and I would check out my book. So eat what you love what you eat for binge eating, and it's based on these principles. What are your thoughts about solving binge eating disorder with a 12-step weighed and measured meal plan with no flour or sugar, similar to AA. If abstinence from alcohol works, why not binge triggers? Well, I've got a real personal feeling about this. I don't want to put down the concept of 12-step because I think it helps a lot of people, and it's been a vehicle for people's change in a powerful way. But I don't necessarily believe, and I will step out and say this, I don't believe that the original intent of the 12-step programs was about weighing and measuring food. It was about abstinence from alcohol. And I think somebody has, people, with good intentions, are trying to make food a substance like alcohol, and it's not. And I know from myself and countless others, and Green Mountain has 41 years of working with people, and they know. The founder, Thelma Whaler, back when she founded this 41 years ago, she knew that weighing, measuring, restricting flour or sugar was not going to work in the long term. And so I think that it just awakens that deprived self, and I think that we react more strongly to it. So I think that there's nothing kind and gentle restriction. And so I just want you to think about that if that's worked for you before. If you've told yourself that you can't have something, doesn't something just kind of awaken inside of you and want it even more? So that's my personal thought process on that, and we don't have a restrictive or diet mentality at the Green Mountain program. So I am going to turn this over. If you have any other questions, don't hesitate to email me. I'm going to turn this back over to Erin so she can talk to you about who has won the free book tonight.
Thank you, Carrie, for an excellent overview of the reasons that underlie binge eating and how to begin to overcome it. And thank you to all of you for joining us tonight. We hope that you have learned something useful to kind of help you along your journey. Hopefully this helped to shed some light for you. Tonight's winner, we do have a name, but I'm changing some things. I don't really want to say the name out loud out of respect for those who may not want it announced. So what we're going to do is we're going to email you. Oh, I'm hearing that she gave the okay. Great. Let's see here. The name is, drum roll. Scrolling up here. Kelly Jackson. Okay, you won a copy of the book, and we will definitely be contacting you by email this week so that we can send the book out to you right away. Thanks for giving us permission to say your name. So have a great evening, and take very good care. Bye-bye.